For spring break of her senior year, Stephanie trudged around Manhattan in a state of loss so acute it felt like snakes coiled around her chest and squeezing. She and her former best friend Heidi had planned this trip for months, their final high school spring break. Stephanie's from Hewlett High and Heidi's from Syosset. They'd share the pull-out couch at Stephanie's father's new place on 85th and 1st. They'd go shopping at Fiorucci and get fake IDs in Times Square, pick up college guys at the Hard Rock Cafe, ride the subway out to Brooklyn for pizza that was supposed to be even better than Mother Kelly's back in Cedarhurst. But that was before Heidi had betrayed her. Now Heidi was in Fort Lauderdale doing Jell-O shots with her clique of stuck-up Syosset bitches, while Stephanie wandered around the city by herself. She went to Fiorucci by herself, to the Hard Rock Cafe by herself, to Times Square and Brooklyn by herself, narrating to the absent Heidi. Look at that cool leopard knapsack. Look at the guitar Angus Young played on Back in Black. Look at the pimp in the ostrich boots. Look at all you're missing, you deceitful cunt. After days of this, the heels of her shoes were ragged. Like most every afternoon this past week, Stephanie wound up on the East River Esplanade, a few blocks from her father's apartment. She collapsed on her usual bench and watched the SkyTram shuttle back and forth to Roosevelt Island. This was a bleak part of the city. The water was gray, the walkway was gray, the smokestacks, the vast steel bridges. The sky looked drab, washed out, even though it was April. Her father's new girlfriend was from Phoenix and was always boasting about its cheesy nickname, Valley of the Sun. Stephanie cringed and lit a cigarette. She was trying not to think about the boisterous mattress squeaking she'd heard last night coming from her father's bedroom. She parted her lips and sniffed delicately to draw her cigarette smoke up in a swirl, the French inhale that Heidi had taught her. 2 benches down was a handsome guy in a polo shirt with headphones over his ears. Stephanie was suddenly ambushed by the memory of Duran Duran's Hungry Like the Wolf, hers and Heidi's theme song. The first time they met, online for the restroom at Patty McGee's, Heidi had been wearing a Duran Duran t-shirt knotted at her belly button, along with rhinestone and leather bracelets piled up both arms to her elbows and dark purple lipstick that was almost black. She had an aura of glamour that Stephanie was awed by. Immediately, Stephanie wanted to knot her own shirt, run home to pile on every bracelet she owned. Her camisole and swatch felt suddenly tacky and childish. Simon or John, she'd asked, pointing at Heidi's shirt. Who would you do first? Oh my God, Simon, those lips, said the as yet unknown Heidi. When they played The Garden, he was practically going down on the microphone. It was the sexiest thing I've ever seen. You were at that show, I could kill you, lucky bitch. They'd been waiting outside the restroom for a while. Heidi was lifting her hand to knock on the door when a loud moan sounded from the other side. A girl squealed, "Baby, yes." Stephanie and Heidi stared at each other, heads cocked. Were they hearing what they thought they were hearing? Something banged against the inside of the door, followed by several male grunts. Heidi had shouted, "Are you guys doing the nasty in there?" Stephanie's mouth fell open. She was pretty nervy, but even she didn't have that kind of balls. "Ask them if they're bumping uglies," she urged Heidi. Heidi grinned and pounded on the door. "Are you guys bumping uglies? Are you hiding the sausage?" Stephanie felt emboldened to take a turn. "Are you doing the crotch tango?" she yelled. "Ew," Heidi exclaimed, but she was smiling. She turned back to address the door. "Is he giving you a beaver injection?" "Ew, back at you," Stephanie laughed. "Is he putting his meat in your taco? Is he sliding his hot dog in your bun?" Pink-faced and chortling, they continued the onslaught until finally the doorknob started to turn. They locked eyes. Make a run for it? Hell no. The door opened and out strode a pug-nosed guy with a self-congratulatory smirk, who didn't even look their way. followed by a girl with ridiculously tangled hair who stopped and stared straight at them. "You are revolting," she said primly. "You are revolting," hers and Heidi's favorite mock insult in the months that followed, delivered in the most pursed-lipped, disapproving way possible, while yanking and twirling their hair around until it stood out like they'd been electrocuted. Now Stephanie stamped out her cigarette. She tried to peer at the river through the wrought iron fence that served as a railing, but it was so high that from her bench the view was black bars with slivers of river through it. Though the prison-like view didn't seem to bother the guy with the headphones. He was leaning back with long legs extended and bare ankles crossed, smoking. Was that a joint? The wind blew the skunky scent of pot in her direction. Stephanie looked closer. He was only a little older than her, maybe in college, startlingly good-looking. He had thick, straight eyebrows, dark hair that fell in feathery waves over his forehead. He had a jutting chin, a deep, sulky indentation above his upper lip. Heidi would have egged her on to go flirt with him, although then she would have swooped in behind Stephanie's back and seduced him. Stephanie gritted her teeth, trying to shove aside the excruciating memory. She'd only just started dating Kevin Kasich, but she'd already been crazy about him. To Heidi, he was just another hookup. "Believe me, I didn't have to work that hard for it," was how she'd laughed it off after Stephanie found out. Then she'd done a mean little imitation of Stephanie's shocked face, bulging her eyes and squinching up her forehead. From what Stephanie had heard, she'd done that same imitation from one end of Long Island to the other. A hot acid sensation burned through her chest. She couldn't sit here by herself anymore. She took a fresh cigarette from her pack and walked over to the gorgeous guy. He glanced up and switched off his Walkman, although he didn't remove his headphones or say hello, just studied her. Suddenly she lost focus. Even in the gray light, his eyes were cobalt blue. As she stood silent, unable to speak, he smiled placidly, raising his eyebrows, still not saying a word. She wondered fleetingly if he were famous, maybe an actor. He seemed perfectly at ease with her staring, as if it happened to him every day. She held up her cigarette. "I can't get this lit in the wind," she lied. Still sitting, he held out a lighter and flicked it. She bent at the waist, sticking out her breast so he could get a look, and she could gain back some of the power she'd lost by staring at him. She brought the tip of her cigarette to the flame. Suddenly he pulled the lighter away. "Hey," Stephanie said. He grinned at her with perfect milk-white teeth. She tried again, and again he jerked the flame away at the last second. This time she cupped his hand to keep him from repeating it, the point all along, she realized. She grinned back at him while she took a deep drag. "Sit down," he said. She hesitated. He was so ridiculously good-looking that she suddenly felt a little unnerved. "How can I eat your chicken if you don't sit down?" he said. "What?" He pointed at the button pinned to the pocket of her denim jacket. She couldn't help laughing. She'd forgotten she was wearing it, something she'd picked up at one of the stalls in the Hewlett Mall food court. "Eat my chicken, I'll blow your mind," it said. She glanced at the joint. "Are you going to offer me a hit?" "I am if you sit down." "You're not the boss of me." But she sat. She put out her cigarette and he handed her the joint. She took a long drag. "You might want to pace yourself," he warned. "It's pretty potent." "Please, I once smoked 3 joints before an algebra exam and I still got an A-. They smoked and watched a tugboat chug crookedly down the river. He pointed through the railing. "See those dark spots? On the surface of the water were black splotches that looked like oil slicks. 10 to 1, at least one of those is a floater." She was pretty sure he didn't mean the Hewlett definition of floater. With his clean white Lacoste shirt and trimmed fingernails, this guy seemed too refined to be talking about a turd in a public swimming pool. She sat back, letting the high wash over her. His deep voice hummed through her brain. "In the winter, when bodies get dumped in the river, they stay at the bottom. Once spring comes and the water starts to get warm, the gases inside them expand and they come bobbing up." He inhaled from the joint, holding the smoke in his lungs, as he said, "Cops call it the spring harvest." With a grunt, he exhaled the smoke. His fingers brushed hers as he passed the joint. "This could be our lucky day." His touch zapped a bolt of electricity straight through her. Her fingers shook as she brought the joint to her lips. She held the smoke in her lungs as he had. "I guess," she said, "but what about those poor dead people floating out there?" Her voice sounded funny, without breath, strangulated. She laughed at the sound, trying not to choke on the bottled-up smoke that came gusting forth. "Everyone's just worm food at the end anyway," he said, "except those guys are fish food." "Fish food," Stephanie repeated, giggling. She was stoned now. It was hard to stop giggling, although it was actually a horrible image, floating corpses, their faces picked away by crabs and sea lice. "Fish food with a bullet in the brain," he added. "Besides, if you end up in the East River with a hole in your skull, you must have fucked someone over, the wrong someone. They probably deserved what they got." He took the joint and pinched it out between his finger and thumb. Wow, how did that not burn? She liked that he didn't even notice the pain, that he talked about dark, seamy stuff, life and death. The guys at home just wanted to talk about cars and stereos. Who cared? This guy was telling her something real, something that mattered. He recognized her depth. A squirrel came scurrying up to the foot of their bench. "So cute," Stephanie murmured. "Those things," he said, "tree rats. I wish we had something to feed it. Here." He dug a half-eaten Hershey bar out of his jeans. She waved it at the squirrel to get its attention. The squirrel hopped up onto the back of the bench. Its long claw toes gripped the slat. She moved sideways to face it. Its flat black eyes stayed on hers. She held out the chocolate, which she was suddenly ravenous for herself. "Here, baby," she said to the squirrel. She broke off a square of chocolate. "We're so baked, little squirrel," she apologized. The squirrel twitched its tail, edging closer, eyeing her cautiously. On its hind feet, it held its paws out, clutched together like a prayer. She wasn't sure why, but her heart skipped. She moved the square closer. It reached out a paw. But suddenly, the guy flicked on his lighter, turned up full blast. The flame hissed, leapt half a foot into the air. With a shocked bawling sound, the squirrel recoiled. The tip of its tail was singed black. "I can't believe you just did that," she said as the squirrel streaked away. Through the pot daze, she felt a pinprick of alarm. "That was so mean." "I probably just saved you from rabies and syphilis. The squirrels here are riddled with them." Oh, her head was fuzzy. What had she been thinking? She could practically feel the squirrel's sharp, pointed teeth puncture her finger, its diseased saliva turning her blood black. She shivered. "Aren't you going to thank me?" he said. He was smiling at her. She let out her breath, relieved that her outburst hadn't ruined everything. "Thank you," she said, flirting again, giving him a coy look from under her lashes. Then his hand was on the back of her head, pulling her to him, his mouth almost but not quite touching hers. She lifted her face. He gripped a handful of her hair and tugged, kissing her hard. Her scalp tingled. Fuck Heidi, fuck Kevin Kasich, fuck everything and everyone else. This was what mattered, the tightening in her breasts, the sliding down sensation, this. They broke apart. She placed the square of chocolate in her mouth and let it melt over her tongue before she swallowed. "Let's go get drunk," he said. "There's a dive on 83rd Street that has dollar shots until 6. "Aren't you at least going to tell me your name first?" He hooked his finger into her belt loop and pulled until they were both standing. His eyes were a dizzying blue. "I'm Gardner," he said. Thank you.